What's up, guys, and welcome to Flex Friday, Week 9. We are actually recording on a Friday this time, so we can talk about the Thursday game. But really, the most important thing is we have a new sponsorship or pseudo-sponsorship, basically. We are now the unofficial Rashid Shaheed podcast after Andy's Babe Ruth moment last week. Andy, how are you feeling about that?
Dude, I feel phenomenal about that. I mean, post route, over the middle, deep touchdown. It's happened exactly like I saw it in my brain. I might be psychic, on a little bit of a heater. Got my SGPN. I'm on a heater mug going. So we're feeling good. So shout out to the Sports Gambling Podcast for making awesome merch. And
absolutely love it. So you guys pay attention to what Andy says today, because the dude knows exactly what's going to happen. So definitely stay tuned after the intro for this week's picks.
Well, that.
I'm stoked this week after our killer week last week. We've basically, just like Andy said, been on a heater, especially Andy. So, Andy, who's your first guy for this week? And let's make this one good, because if they don't watch the rest of the video, this is the one you're going to be held accountable for.
I didn't have any That's So Raven vision moments this week like I did last week. But starting out, I'm going with Jerome Ford. He's still nursing his ankle injury a little bit, but it seems like he's practicing more. He played through it last week. Only 33% of the snaps. It seems like all the running backs split fairly evenly. But as his ankle gets healthier, I feel like Pierre Strong's going to get less volume and Jerome Ford's going to get more. He's primarily their first and second down back that I think that they want to use. And they get to play the Cardinals this week, who, especially after trading Josh Dobbs, that's going to be a pretty brutal offense. And the Cardinals, they're fourth in points to the running back, 31st DVOA versus the run. It's a home game in Cleveland. Sounds like there's going to be weather. It's going to be windy. It's going to be raining. It's going to be a game where, the Browns already want to just pound the rock and run the football, but they're really going to want to run the football in this one. I think both he and Hunt are good plays. Hunt keeps finding the end zone. And I could see both of those guys scoring in this game.
Well, definitely from last week, I don't think you can watch the Pierre Strong touches and be worried that he's going to steal work from anyone. I really do think it just comes down to Ford's health, right? Their usage last week was very interesting. Strong and Hunt basically split, and then come the fourth quarter, Ford got most of his touches. So I'm curious if they were I don't want to say saving him, but maybe if they were only going to give him 10 touches, they're let's give him to him in the fourth quarter when he maybe can break one. But I'm with you. I think Hunt's a great play too. I think Ford's great. This is one of those games that, in years past, we would say this is a classic Nick Chubb game. And it just makes me miss him even more. Just that wet, rainy, Cleveland stuff where you just watch Chubb go 35 for 140. But
chugging.
But I agree with either Walker plays and they're going to run the ball, or Watson plays who, A, he hasn't been playing well, or B, his shoulder is obviously injured and they're probably not going to push the ball down the field much. And they're just going to hand it off and try to come away with a win leaning on the defense. So for my first one this week, I'm going to follow suit after we made the Shaheed touchdown happen. And I'm going to go back to New Orleans. And I'm going to try to use some of Andy's juju, and we're going to get Chris Olave going this week. Now, Olave at the beginning of the year never could have been on this list. He was way too highly drafted. But he really hasn't been too great this year. But all of the stats would make you think he's in for an elite fantasy season, right? He's had 9+ targets in 6 out of 8 games. Second most air yards in the NFL behind only A.J. Brown, 26% target share. All of those things would be oh, that dude is a top 10 fantasy wide receiver. The only question is it Derek Carr? Is it Chris Olave? Or is it just this offense? But I think he just may start to get going. And Chicago's a great defense for that to happen against.
Yeah, I mean, Chicago is 31st DVOA versus the pass, allowing almost 30 points per game to wide receivers. And he is still the wide receiver one, and it's going to come through and it's going to click in some of these games eventually. He's just too good to not be converting on all these targets. And I'd say it's more on Carr in the offense because Olave is still a fantastic player. So, yeah, I think this is a good start here. And coming up next, I'm going to move over to another guy who would not be on this list earlier in the season, but T. Higgins. I saw somewhere that most teams that are winless, T. Higgins is like the number one guy that they all have in common. So if you drafted T. Higgins, it's probably been rough. You might not even be really paying that much attention anymore. But, if you're still holding on there, I think this is a good time where he can be started. Bills are middle of the road in fantasy points versus the wide receiver. It's the either first or I think it's the second highest over under. It's one of the only ones up at 50. They're 29th versus wide receiver ones, 22nd versus wide receiver twos. Tre'Davious White's out for the year. Kyer Elam was put on IR the other day. They just traded for Rasul Douglas. So there's a lot going on with the corners for the Bills. And you've got to imagine that they're going to key in on Jamar Chase with how good he is. I think they're going to give him all the safety help. When they played in the playoffs, Jamar got a touchdown against him. Didn't have like a massive game, but I mean, he's the guy to take away. And, Higgins is still a good receiver. Eventually it's going to come through. It sucks that it's this late in the season and he probably hasn't helped you win. In fact, might be a reason why you've lost some games. But this Bengals offense is really starting to get in a little bit more of a groove, start to score more points. And I think this is going to be a really fun game to watch. One of the only games that I'm really looking forward to this weekend. And I think eventually he's going to have a bounce back game. And I think this is a great spot for it.
Yeah, I mean, I think Higgins has just really had some bad luck, right? Burrow was hurt to start the season. Higgins was healthy. Burrow's been getting healthier. Higgins has been hurt. And last week, I think Higgins was just kind of brought back a little slowly. He did play a lot, but he wasn't up to his normal snap share percentage, basically. So I think moving forward, I think Higgins is a great play. I think the Bengals offense is picking it up. And same thing with Tyler Boyd. Like, I know you spoke about Tyler Boyd a couple weeks ago. I've been running out Tyler Boyd in a 16-team league, which that's a good league to run him out in. I'm not really recommending him in other leagues, but he's been pretty solid. And just like you said, if this offense is humming, you kind of can just play those wide receiver weapons. And against the Bills, I think Higgins could have a good game. This game could potentially get high scoring. And, it's going to be an exciting game for sure, just with that rematch from last year and all the factors going in that this is going to be a fun one to watch. And Higgins is going to get some one-on-one coverage if he can make a play.
Yeah. Who you got next?
So I'm going to go another wide receiver. I'm actually doing all wide receivers this week. When I looked at the running backs, I kind of just gagged a little bit. I gagged twice yesterday, once when I looked at the running backs, once when I had to empty the kitty litter because my girlfriend is on vacation, and cat litter is the most disgusting thing on the planet, man. I cannot. Her advice was to wear a mask, and I was like, maybe next time, to be honest. But I'm going to go back to another wide receiver. And this is someone I liked in the preseason, and I really liked what I saw last week especially. And that's going to be Jayden Reed of the Green Bay Packers against the Rams. The one thing that I loved the most about Reed last week was he had his season high in snap percentage, and that's with Christian Watson back, on the field. That would be one thing if Watson was still out. Or, I mean, I know he was banged up a couple weeks ago, but he came in with no injury designation. So you have to assume he was at least healthy enough to play. 78%, though, last week for Jayden Reed snap percentage. Season high, 83 yards. He's a great route runner. And I just think the mix of Watson struggling and Jordan Love, he's, let's be honest, he is struggling recently. I think Reed's shorter field, availability is just an easier throw for Jordan Love to get going on. And definitely a couple of Reed's touchdowns. He has 3 this year. They've been like designed plays mostly. So it's not that he's going to get a design play in the red zone, but it's within the realm of possibilities that make me think Reed could be a pretty good play this week. I'm not going to say trust all of these Packers weapons. I think I'm just calling my shot that Reed's the one I might trust most against the Rams.
Yeah, I mean, he had 8 targets last week, 6 receptions. Rams 22nd DVOA versus the pass, so they're a very beatable defense. You know, back-to-back home games for Green Bay, which, you know, they've played a lot more on the road to start the season. And yeah, you know, and actually Love has struggled, but he actually looked pretty decent in that Vikings game. As a huge Packer fan watching it, I mean, he had the bad interception, but there were a lot of dropped balls, a lot of penalties that brought back plays. And, you know, God, they're the youngest team in the league. Hopefully they can get it going. But, you know, Jayden Reed being a rookie too, as the season goes on, we expect him to be more involved. And if he can be the guy to kickstart this offense, that would make me so happy. So,
and the Packers kind of have like, they're kind of like the Jared Goff of teams in the sense that them at home, they are a lot. I don't know, that home field is just one of those ones that it's an energy thing. And I think their whole team, going back to Favre and Rodgers, obviously, like that's where they play well, is at home. And that's when they have their blow up offensive performances for sure. So Who is your third flex of the week before we get into this week's streamers?
So going back to that same game, actually, on the other side, I'm going Darrel Henderson. And, you know, he actually got outsnapped by Royce Freeman in the last game, but Henderson had more touches. And, you know, in the game against the Steelers, when the Rams were winning, it was Henderson who had more snaps. Packers 24th DVOA versus the run, giving up the 3rd most points to the running back position. I mean, talked about it numerous times before, but this run defense has struggled. This year, their pass defense is struggling a lot too, which was surprising to me with all the first-round picks they have, either in edge rush or in the secondary. But it is what it is. Rams also 8th best in adjusted line yards, so their run blocking has been really good this year. And Packers also just traded Rasul Douglas to the Bills, who big locker room guy. He's probably playing the best at corner this year. Jair's got some back problems, and he's been struggling a little bit out there. I hope he can get it back together. But, you know, if there's one surefire always way to exploit this defense, it's with the run game. And I think Darrel Henderson is going to be the guy this week who's going to make it happen.
Yeah, I mean, from what we've seen over the past 2 weeks, Henderson and Freeman are basically 50-50, and it's just who gets the touchdown. But Henderson had an okay game even without scoring last week, that I do think I would still lean Henderson, like you said. And that's just like, that's the position we're in, right? Like this week, we got a lot of good teams on bye. There's multiple running backs and stud running backs, not even just like normal running. You know, we have like McCaffrey on bye this week. So ETN on bye. Like, you're having to fill guys in. And I think looking to this Rams backfield, definitely Henderson. And like you said too, like if Henderson is not available, but Freeman's sitting out there, I don't hate throwing him in if you have to, just to plug him in.
Yeah. And I mean, with Matt Stafford being out probably too, then I have to say that the Rams are probably going to want to run the ball more, or even just give him some easy completions to the running back. So I think both these guys have a chance to have some more receptions than usual. So, yeah, I think a little bit more volume this week probably.
Okay, so for my last one of the week, wide receiver 3, I'm going with someone that I just enjoy watching on the field, and that's going to be Demario Douglas of the New England Patriots against Washington. Now, here's the good things about Demario Douglas. 5 catches last week, 13 targets over the last 2 weeks, 77% snap share, which is easily his highest of the season, 62% the week before. And both of his best weeks, which are these last 2 weeks, have come after their bye. So it seems like something that they're starting to integrate him more into the offense. Kendrick Bourne obviously hurt his knee. Devontae Parker is banged up. Juju, I honestly think he doesn't have like kneecaps anymore or something, because Juju just looks like a 37-year-old out there on the field. So those are the positives for Demario Douglas, right? He's more involved in the offense. The wide receiver room is banged up. So I think they're going to manufacture some touches for him. Now, the negative, those 5 catches last week were for 25 yards. So with that being said, I just think that's the area of the field that he's going to operate in. He's 5'8". He's, maybe he'll stretch the field, but I think he's more of a gadget, just high concentration kind of player. But, he's quick enough to make a play. So I think you just have to hope that this volume is enough for him to be a good flex play week in, week out. 5 catches for 25 yards isn't great, but 5 catches is good. So it really depends on your league. It depends on your format, and it depends on who you're playing him over. But he's going to be on the field, and he's going to be a part of that offense, which usually is something you can at least hang your hat on as a guy when you're playing. I hate so much playing a guy and looking at the game and being like, dude, he's not even on the field. At least if they're on the field and other things, you can kind of suffer through it. But if they're not even on the field, it's just so frustrating.
When the hope gets taken away from you, the wind from your sails, as you will. And, this is a great matchup for him too. Washington, second most fantasy points to the wide receiver, 30th DVOA versus the pass. So this is the way that they can be exploited. And, with Kendrick Bourne being gone on IR, him being integrated more into the offense, he could easily take over as the number 1 target for this team.
So let's move on to our streamers of the week. Andy, why don't you kick us off with tight end for week 9?
So I'm just going to roll with back-to-back. We're going Jake Ferguson again. Got in the end zone last week, finishes the tight end 10. Which is great for somebody you pick up off of, either pick up off of waivers or just stream. It was 4 for 4 and playing the Eagles, who are 32nd DVOA versus the tight end. So according to DVOA stats, this is the best matchup to have. Eagles have struggled a bit with wide receiver ones as well. They haven't been great against guarding the wide receiver, but it being a divisional game, at home, I feel like they're going to be keying in on Lamb a little bit more. Lamb hasn't had over 10.2 points in Philly in the 3 games that he's played there. He's had big games in Dallas against them, but not at Lincoln Financial. Ferguson, as a rookie, had a touchdown there last year, so just hoping that he can repeat that. Also, if you picked up Trey McBride last week, like I suggested, you're looking great. This week they're playing the Browns. It's going to be windy. New quarterback in Arizona. There's a chance that if he has a bad game, somebody's going to drop him. Look to see if he winds up on waivers again, if that's the case, because he's got 3 great matchups ahead, and I have a feeling he's going to be on this list, especially if he struggles next week as somebody that you can stream. So just throwing that back out there again.
Yeah, I think Ferguson is a good play. I'm actually having to flex him in a league this week, which is rough, but it's rough and it's not the best. But, I think everything you said about Ferguson is right. He's involved in the offense. Philly is favored here. So the guess would be is that Dallas is probably going to have to pass in this game. And, Ferguson's been becoming a bigger part of this offense too. I don't think we've fully seen his full involvement yet with the Cowboys. And it's great to know that he scored last year, right? This is a matchup that works for him. Mm-hmm. And like you said, Lamb's struggles against the Eagles is a positive for Ferguson as well. And just like you said, McBride, man, if you can get your hands on McBride, I love it. I mean, he was very hyped a couple years ago, and I think he just kind of got in a bad situation. He didn't get used. He got stuck behind Ertz. He got a Kyler injury. And then last week, he just kind of showed off that talent that people thought he had coming out as a rookie. So for my tight end, I'm going to go back to the well. Logan Thomas at New England. Now, Thomas has been great basically every single week except the 1 week I recommended to play him earlier this year. Going back and looking through his stats, it was 15, 12, 9, 8.6, 12, 10, 8, whatever. So with that being said, as crazy as this is, Logan Thomas is tight end 6 in points per game, which is higher than Goddard, higher than Evan Ingram, who are both people that you are going to play on a week in, week out basis at tight end. So Thomas has actually been really good. And I think I'm just going to go back to it. This game could be a weird one, right? I could see this game weirdly getting some points scored in it. New England has a great defense, but Washington's been looking pretty solid on offense. And this kind of just has the makings of an ugly game.
Yeah. And, Philly, 32nd DVOA versus the tight end. New England, 31st DVOA versus the tight end. And like you said, Thomas has been good this year, and he's been pretty good in his career too. He's just had to deal with injuries. And when you play for Washington, it's always tough. But yeah, I mean, tight end 6, and he's a guy who's probably available in a lot of leagues. So
we're just underrated. I really wouldn't be surprised to see Thomas on the waiver wire somewhere. Not in every league, but just in a couple. And just to toss out another name, I was kind of going back and forth between these two guys. I think Cole Kmet could be a good play too. His matchup is tough, but watching the Bears game last week, it was nice to see Bagent basically just pepper Kmet with targets. I think because he's just scared to go down the field. But catches are catches and points are points, especially at tight ends. So who's your QB for week 9?
So I'm going, big Sunday for my guy, Rashid Shaheed. Saints playing at home against the Bears, 31st DVOA versus the pass, allowing the 5th most points to the quarterback. You got Chris Olave on here, so I'm going to pair him up with Derek Carr. The Bears did add Montez Sweat on the D-line, but they're still going to be very beatable through the air. Also, 30th DVOA in guarding the running back. So I'm going to be betting on Kamara over receiving yards. They played the Chargers last week. I won some money betting on Austin Eckler, who had a big game, receiving especially. Also pretty bad against the deep ball. So not saying that Shaheed will score again, but I think, all these receivers are going to have opportunities. A team that's still just really struggling and trying to find out their identity. So
for sure. I think that's a good call. Carr was definitely someone I was considering as well. And just like you said, man, I think I need to get like one of those red lights that spins and goes off for every Rashid Shaheed touchdown. That's just in my house. I hit a button and it just starts spinning Rashid Shaheed touchdown. And I will root for Shaheed for his entire career. So for my quarterback, I'm going to preface this by saying I'm going to go a little deeper and just try to pick someone that we haven't really spoken about. With that being said, guys like Sam Howell, Geno Smith, I would play over the guy I'm going to talk about. So if those guys are available, I would definitely prefer them. Howell has been very, very good. And I think he's someone that you could definitely pick up if you've been struggling at quarterback. If you lost Kirk Cousins and Howell sitting out there, I think you could do a lot worse than that. And Geno doesn't have the best matchup against Baltimore, but that's one of those games where it could be very defensive, but it could open up into a shootout. But with that being said, the quarterback I'm going to go with this week is Taylor Heinicke versus Minnesota. He's getting the start after Ritter's concussion, benching. Arthur Smith kind of went back and forth on what happened last week. But I think we're all at least semi-excited to see what Heinicke can do. He's nothing special, but I just think Ritter is so lackluster that any sort of energy could be good for the Falcons. Going off last year, we don't really have a big sample size of Heinicke this year, and I'm not really going to go off what he did coming into that game. Last year, when he was playing just a bottom half defense, though, he was a top 20 QB in 5 out of 6 games. So I think that's a fairly solid sample size where it's just like when he plays a team that isn't super strong defensively, he puts up QB late 1, early 2 numbers, which is kind of what you're looking for out of a streamer. So I think he's got great energy, and I wouldn't be surprised if Atlanta gets a short field maybe once or twice this week with Jaron Hall on the other side starting for Minnesota, right? They did make the Dobbs trade, but let's not forget that Dobbs is not getting the start this week. It's going to be the rookie. So, a pick, a turnover, a couple sacks, and that's kind of what you want as a QB, right? Like it's much more lucrative to get a 200-yard 3-touchdown game than it is a 350-yard no touchdown game. It's all about the TDs, baby. So I think Heinicke's a solid play. I wouldn't say I would rank him above, any higher than probably 14, 15. But you never know in leagues, man. Like some leagues, there's 2 quarterbacks on every team, and it is rough to find a guy on a bye.
Oh yeah. I mean, it seems like my work league every year, most people draft 2 quarterbacks and it can be brutal to stream. But I mean, Heineke is just a baller, man. He's not afraid to put his life on the line and go diving for that first down. So, I think he can get some rushing yards in this game too. Minnesota allowing the 20th most points to the quarterback. So yeah, I think if you're in desperate need, he's a guy I would take over a lot of the other guys on the waiver wire.
So what game are we going to target this week? There were some rough ones, and we try, if you guys ever watch, like Andy and I try to not pick the obvious games. Like, of course, like KC, Chiefs Dolphins, man. Like, like no duh play Chiefs Dolphins players. So this was a weird week, but what's a game that you're looking at that could have, sometimes it's an ugly game script that leads to points.
Yeah. And, also this week we have 10 backup quarterbacks who are starting. If you can't, especially if you count Zach Wilson, which I do count Zach Wilson as a backup quarterback, which is crazy. There's 28 teams playing, 10 of them starting a backup. I mean, there's really like 4 games that are like obvious. Oh, these are 2 good teams playing against each other. 10 of the 14 games have an over-under of 41 points or less. So fuck it, man. Packers, Rams. Let's go. It's only a 38-point over-under. Rams are going to have Ripon at quarterback, but Green Bay, 28th DVOA. Rams, 23rd defensive DVOA. A lot of drop balls and penalties by the Packers last week, which is so frustrating to watch. If they can get it together, this offense might be able to do something. It seems like they start to get it together in the third quarter, but man, if they could just start early, and obviously their defense is susceptible. Rams, they just got embarrassed by the Cowboys, so they might come out firing, might rally around this backup. So even with him in, you're obviously starting Cooper Kupp, you're starting Puka Nacua. I think the running backs are both startable. For Green Bay, make a dartboard with all the wide receivers on there. Throw your dart, or go Jayden Reed. I think Musgrave, the Rams have struggled against the tight end. He's a very, very desperate play. I can't really recommend starting many of these guys, but if you're in a bind, I mean, it's 2 bad defenses, and that could open up something. Some broken plays, some missed assignments where somebody's going to be running wide open and get into the end zone. So,
yeah, I think Green Bay is it's been a rough year, man. And I really go back to what we talked about last week, that I think Aaron Jones not being healthy has just really killed their offense, because I think coming into this season, Aaron Rodgers leaving, like everyone was kind of like, that's okay. Like, obviously their coach kind of comes from that San Fran idea where they can run the offense through the running game. And Aaron Jones is an incredible player. He's just hurt. And then when he got back, he's obviously fully just not healthy, because, I mean, A.J. Dillon seems like a great dude, but that guy is not an RB1 on an NFL team. Like, that's just not what he is, right? He's a pounder. He can get you 3, he can get you 4, but he's not a game breaker by any sense. So if Jones can get healthy and they can keep up, I think this game could have some points for sure. So for mine, I'm going to go Colts at Carolina. It's a 44 over under. Something that I did like, just kind of looking back, Indy's last 4 games, and these, keep in mind, Saints, Titans, Browns are 3 of these teams. Jags were one of them. I think Jags have a good offense, so I'm not going to count them. But Saints, Titans, Browns are not elite offenses by any means. And last 4 games Indy's been in, 23-16, 37-20, 39-38, 38-17. So those are just some high numbers that Indy's been in. So I think this game has a chance to kind of just match those scores. I think Jonathan Taylor, Zach Moss, Minshew was a guy I almost went with as my streamer. Josh Downs has looked absolutely awesome. You're playing Pittman. I think Chuba Hubbard is a maybe. He did look to have the backfield over Sanders last week. But with that being said, he only got like 20-something rushing yards. So I just think in general, that team is just like not great, and I don't really want to target. I am curious to see what happens with Jonathan Mingo. He had one of his better games last week, so I'd love to see him more involved after just, kind of building off last week. But this week isn't great. There's really just some key games. There's the Chiefs game. There's the Bengals,
Cowboys.
Bills game. There's the Eagles and the Cowboys, and
that's about it.
That's about it. So
a lot of gross games.
Yeah.
But hey, I'd still love me some good low scoring defensive football.
I love defensive football, man.
Go back to the 30s. Let's go. But there's only one team in the NFL who scored over 20 points in every single game this year. And surprisingly, it's not the Chiefs. It's not the Dolphins. It is the Indianapolis Colts. So they somehow find a way to always get it to 20. And, the Panthers, they won a gross one last week. Maybe that gets their offense going a little bit more. The Colts are susceptible on defense. They've, been allowing big scores by other teams. So I can see this game this is a game that I looked at a lot too and almost chose. And, when you're choosing between all these gross games, you got to really sort through the bunch. You cut off the mold in little areas. You got the games that are a block of cheese. Sometimes you just got to trim a little bit of the mold, and there's still a really nice piece of cheese there.
100%. Sometimes you have to go crustless, but you end up with a tasty Uncrustable, and that is the goal of these games. So thank you guys for tuning in. Flex Friday, Week 9. Andy, thanks for joining, and we will catch you guys next week. Go Rashid Shaheed all day, the official, unofficial podcast.